welcome everybody. This is the board's Natural and Cultural Resources Committee meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District on February 15th, 2023, beginning at 12:35 p.m. I'm going to ask our clerk to identify herself, Rebecca Sisson, and do a roll call.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Eccles.
Present.
Director Coffey.
Present.
Director Mercurio.
Here.
Great. And the committee staff that are joining us today: Assistant General Manager Ken Wysocki.
Here.
And Acting Chief of DECO, Ren Bates.
Present.
Great. And the staff will be presenting today are Principal Planner Neoma Laval and Landscape Architect Carmen Erasmus. The additional staff who are joining us today are Chief of Stewardship Matt Grawl and Environmental Services Manager Becky Tuden.
Great, thank you. Today's meeting is held virtually pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361. And today we are all attending virtually, although in general we can attend in person, via phone, or video conferencing. I want to start with a land acknowledgement since this is the board's Natural and Cultural Resources Committee. So I'm going to start with that. The East Bay Regional Park District's headquarters is located within the Wichan territory on the unceded lands of the Ohlone Chochenyo speaking peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. The lands now encompassed within the boundaries of the East Bay Regional Park District are the ancestral territory of the Ohlone, Bay Miwok, and Delta Yukon. Today's Ohlone, Bay Miwok, and Delta Yukon people are thriving, vital members of the Greater Bay Area community. They remain intrinsically connected to the land they have stewarded since time immemorial. So please join us in recognizing and honoring this land and their ancestors, elders, descendants, and all other members of their communities. We're also providing live audio and video streaming and have provided the public the opportunity to email, call in prior to the meeting for public comment, or comment live via Zoom today. And all information regarding participation in this meeting can be found on the agenda on the district website, ebparks.org. After each presentation, we will take public comment on that item. And if you have public comment on an item not on the agenda, there's an opportunity for that towards the end of the meeting. Okay, are there any questions about the meeting procedures? Okay, I don't see anybody ask with questions, so we are going to proceed with our first agenda item. So we have Principal Planner Neoma Laval. Please start.
Yep. Neoma Laval, Principal Planner, Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. Good afternoon, Chair Eccles, Director Coffey, and Director Mercurio. I am here this afternoon along with my colleague, Josh Phillips, to present on the recreation planning process that has been developed for the HCP preserve lands. Josh, will you please introduce yourself?
My name is Josh Phillips, Ecological Services Coordinator in the Stewardship Department. Good afternoon, Chair Eccles and Directors Mercurio and Coffey. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So we are now 15 years into the implementation of the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Communities Conservation Plan. We'll refer to these two plans collectively as the HCP or the plan during this presentation. Since 2007, we have acquired 14,505 acres in partnership with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy. This map shows what our conservation landscape looks like today in East Contra Costa County. The Park District was drawn in part to the partnership because of the recreational opportunities in an area that did not have a lot of public access to open space lands. However, the partnership provides at least an equal opportunity to meet the Park District's conservation goals expanding open space, protecting sensitive species and habitat, and expanding habitat linkages, to name a few. Listed species occurring on Park District lands, such as the California red-legged frog, do not follow lines on a map. Thus, protecting larger contiguous areas benefits this species and other species. You'll see here today, after 15 years, in the red hash marks are all the properties that the Park District has purchased with the Habitat Conservancy, and these lands are subject to the plans, guidelines, and management requirements. This entire area in East Contra Costa County, in conjunction with the parklands and other open space lands owned by state parks or Contra Costa Water District, creates a landscape of connected habitat for species and conservation. The partnership between the Park District and the other implementing partners, especially the Habitat Conservancy, is based on the alignment of the Park District's dual mission of conservation and public access, and along with the HCP's biological goals and objectives. The HCP outlines rigorous management standards for species protection, and the Park District manages those lands per the guidelines. The HCP was developed to help address the conflict between natural resources, species, land, water, and development. In addition to providing a streamlined permitting process and mitigation for development impacts, the plan prioritized conserving land and species in the region, while also integrating recreation to benefit the East Bay residents where recreation was compatible with the biological goals and objectives of the plan. But ultimately, the preserved lands are mitigation for development projects and for conservation purposes. In 30 years, at the end of the permit term of the plan, up to 30,000 acres total will be conserved. The co-permittees that are allowed to apply for permits under the plan include local land use agencies like the cities of East Contra Costa County and the county itself, and then the regional implementing partners are also important aspects. Ultimately, the plan, in partnership with the Conservancy and the Park District and the other partners, in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and CDFW, create an interesting mosaic of partners and guidelines and goals to consider when we are approaching how to manage these lands and public access.
The East Contra Costa County HCP is a multi-species HCP that covers 28 species, including both plant and wildlife species. As you'll see on the slide, it covers some of the more well-known state and federally listed species that occur on Park District lands, such as the Alameda whipsnake, California tiger salamander, California red-legged frog. But it also covers other rare species, including some that are not yet state or federally listed, like burrowing owl, as such species may be listed in the future. So these are the species that need to be considered during the planning process for HCP lands. But just as importantly, these are also the species that the HCP preserve lands to which we'll be introducing passive recreation are designed to protect.
So when planning for public access, it's really important to start with an understanding of the goals for the preserved lands. As mentioned previously, the HCP's goals are focused on conservation, restoration, mitigation, and permitting for development projects. The plan accounts for recreation on preserved lands, but outlines expectations for what recreation will look like on those lands. All of these expectations are outlined in the plan's Conservation Measure 1.5. The conservation measure provides the framework and guidelines within which Park District staff can plan for public access. The Park District's goal is to expand public access in East Contra Costa County and to protect resources. We must consider that Conservation Measure 1.5 states that recreation is of secondary importance, but it also acknowledges that there is a societal benefit of recreation. Ultimately, when planning for public access, the nexus between meeting the Park District's dual mission and meeting the plan's biological goals and objectives requires understanding the plan's guidelines for recreation and the fact that consensus among all the approving partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Conservancy, and the Park District, this consensus must be reached prior to any public access on the preserved lands. This is why we developed the HCP recreation planning process. We wanted to create a planning process that clearly documents our decision-making at each step. By doing so, it reduces the length of future negotiations with our HCP partners, because we will have mapped out how we got to our proposed recreation plan and why that plan meets the HCP's biological goals and objectives. Josh is going to go into more detail about each phase of the plan, but I'll briefly say we had 4 main phases that were developed. The first part is the initial assessment, which includes meeting with our partners and really understanding what are the goals for a particular planning area or preserve area. Then staff, Park District staff, is able to, in phase 2, draft a recreation plan. In phase 3, we return to our partners and we refine and finalize the recreation plan and move towards approval of that plan. Finally, phase 4 is a very important aspect because it's the adaptive recreation management. While we have not yet opened public access to these lands, we have to consider adaptive management as part of the planning process because we're required to monitor recreational use impacts. And if we see those impacts adversely affecting the biological goals and objectives of the HCP, then we will have to adjust or change how recreation is occurring on those preserved lands. So phase 4 is an iterative process that may require changes to recreation practices over time.
So this map shows the Clayton Ranch Preserve area, which is located adjacent to Black Diamond Mines. The recreation planning process we're describing today was actually developed to address issues that arose with our HCP partners during our initial early planning efforts for this area. However, the process will also apply to all future planning efforts for other HCP preserve lands. So the first step in the planning process is the phase 1 initial assessment. The overall goal of this phase is to reach agreement with our HCP partners on the overall recreation and preservation goals for a preserve. So for example, are there areas in the preserve where recreation should be focused? Maybe these areas are already more disturbed or are more suitable for other reasons? Or are there portions of the preserve where restoration and preservation should be prioritized and recreation limited? And these could include areas that are very rich in unique biological resources. So to answer these questions, it requires understanding the existing conditions of the preserve, such as the location of sensitive species, expected movement corridors, and the existing infrastructure like the road network, as well as any data gaps. So therefore, this phase involves meeting with our HCP partners, sharing information, creating maps of sensitive species and habitat locations, maps of existing infrastructure, and agreeing on a broad outline of the recreation and preservation goals for the preserve area. So phase 2 is really a key step. Phase 2 is where the HCP guidelines are fully considered when evaluating each potential recreation element, such as trail locations. So as shown on this slide, and as I'm going to talk about in more detail, some of the HCP guidelines are very specific about where some recreation uses may occur. And at times, these guidelines may conflict or be difficult to achieve. So I'm going to read 2 of them that address trails. The first one is trails. Picnic areas and backpack camps will be prohibited within 300 feet of wetlands and streams that provide suitable habitat for covered amphibians or tricolored blackbird. So the wetlands that were referred to in this guideline, they actually include all the stock ponds on the preserved lands, as those provide potential habitat for California red-legged frog and California tiger salamander, which are HCP covered species. And the second guideline I want to draw your attention to is trails will be established on existing roads or trails wherever possible to minimize the need for new ground disturbing activities. So given that the majority of ranch roads were built to access ponds and springs, and that constructing new trails further away from ponds involves new habitat disturbance, Well, there's these two guidelines conflict, and if they had to be implemented the way they're written, it would make providing recreation access difficult. Very fortunately, the HCP authors anticipated these types of issues and included text stating that exceptions to the guidelines will be considered on a case-by-case basis, will also require approval by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So Naoma and I grasped onto this, and this led the Park District to propose conducting what we called an aquatic habitat analysis to determine if an exception to the pond setback guideline is appropriate based on physical and/or biological considerations. So this next slide shows what that aquatic habitat assessment looked like for each pond. So the overall goal of conducting the assessment was to provide our HCP partners with the information that they needed to support exceptions to the 300-foot setback guideline. So some of the factors that we considered included, are there covered species present or expected? Is public use expected to be high in the area of that pond? For that, we essentially used the distance from the nearest proposed staging area or trailhead as a proxy, with the assumption that the further into the preserve you get, the less foot traffic there's going to be. Is the pond visible or easily accessible from the access road? Are there feasible options such as wildlife permeable fencing, signage, or other deterrents that we could use to encourage people to stay on the trail and away from the ponds? Importantly, does the access road provide an essential trail connection? Do we need it? Or is there a low impact alternative of potentially rerouting the trail? So for the Clayton Ranch Preserve, we did this evaluation for 30 ponds over approximately 4,000 acres. And we had identified 13 ponds within 300 feet of an access road that we were proposing to use as a trail. I'm very happy to report that this effort was well received by our HCP partners, and exceptions to the 300-foot setback guideline were granted. And I think importantly, this really demonstrates the willingness of our HCP partners to work together and to work creatively to find solutions to move the process forward. So while I was focused mostly on the guidelines related to pond setbacks, the HCP does contain other guidelines to protect sensitive biological resources. For example, there are several guidelines related to protecting Alameda whipsnake, which is a covered species. These include no new trails in Alameda whipsnake core habitat, and prohibiting or limiting bicycle use within 500 feet of Alameda whipsnake core habitat. As background, core habitat consists of scrub and chaparral plant communities that serve as activity centers and provide essential habitat for Alameda whipsnake. It is also important to note that Alameda whipsnakes also actively use surrounding habitat types such as grasslands, oak woodlands, and even riparian habitats. There are also guidelines related to protecting sensitive habitat types such as wetlands, as well as limits on the extent of recreational amenities, such as limits on numbers of staging areas and picnic areas within the entire preserve system. As Naomi mentioned, phase 3 is refine and then finalize the recreation plan. In this phase, the draft recreation plan is presented to our partners, our HCP partners. Importantly, given the preceding steps, the ongoing HCP partner participation, and documenting the decision-making process, the goal is for there to be general agreement on the elements of the recreation plan at this stage. However, final adjustments to the plan will be made as needed, and the end result is a final recreation plan. And I'll hand it back over to Naoma.
So looking forward to implementation, staff is working on how to best monitor recreation use and impacts. Staff is currently working on post-opening monitoring plans for other new parkland openings. Monitoring will include trail counters, camera traps, and special signage. We'll apply similar techniques to preserve lands once those areas are fully open to public access. Another strategy will be implementing education and enforcement strategies and minimization measures for recreational use impacts. Our naturalists are working to create programs, especially tailored for HCP preserved lands, and we're also working with our public safety department to discuss how to best enforce the guidelines. We are also committed to creating a unique branding with signage designed to educate and inform the public on how to recreate on preserved lands. Ultimately, we want visitors to understand the importance and uniqueness of the preserved land system and to have a different mindset to recreation on those parklands. Ultimately, the outcome none of us want is that public access could be adjusted or discontinued if it's found to be incompatible with the biological goals and objectives. So we're doing everything that we can to implement and adjust as needed and to plan for that in phase 4. This planning process that was developed has really led to a smoother process and a well-documented decision-making process. We have 2 recreation plans that have been approved by the resource agencies that cover 4,500 acres. And we have tentative approval on a recreation plan for an additional 4,000 acres. And then ultimately, I think some of the best outcomes is that we really have a stronger relationship with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and a lot of trust has been built that we can really get recreation and public access right on the preserved lands and still meet the biological goals and objectives. So in the 15 years since the plan was adopted in 2007, in addition to the 14,505 acres that have been acquired, we have 3 large planning areas that we have tentative approval on the public access recreation plans. And actually, I should say Roddy Ranch Restoration and Public Access Plan was fully adopted last year, so it does have complete approval. And we're hoping to adopt the Vasco Hills and Byron Vernal Pools Preserve Management Plan this year. And in 2019 is when we reached tentative approval on a recreational concept for Clayton Ranch. Before we can get to public access, we need to adopt the preserve management plans and then have a cost sharing agreement in place. So currently staff is working on financial analysis, cost analysis for Vasco Hills and Byron Vernal Pools, which will then lead to a cost sharing agreement. We'll use the same methods for analysis for costs and getting to a cost sharing agreement for the other preserved land areas. And then within 3 to 5 years, we'll hopefully have public access on a portion of the preserved land system. Obviously, there's other additional tasks that we are working towards that will also have to be completed, such as the branding for the preserved lands, a really well-focused education campaign, and additional community outreach. This is an involved process, and it is a lot of work, but it is setting us up for success. If we can successfully implement public access in a way that meets the biological goals and objectives, then we can do something very few other HCPs and their partners have done successfully across the nation. Josh and I attended the National HCP Coalition Conference in the fall, and we heard a lot of stories of things not going as planned when recreation was opened up on preserve systems in other parts of the country. We have an opportunity to learn from those mistakes and to do it right and to have a really successful implementation of public access in the East Contra Costa County Habitat Preserve Land System. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Naomi and Josh. Really wonderful job on the presentation. Really appreciate all the details and information. Learned a lot. So I'm going to ask my fellow board members if they have questions or comments they'd like to make. You can just put your hand up and, okay, both of them. I think Director Mercuro got there first, so you can go ahead and start.
It's amazing what a nanosecond will do for you. Okay, so I do have some questions here. And one of them is, was Clayton Ranch purchased from Save Mount Diablo?
So Clayton Ranch has the entirety of the park system. There is properties that were purchased in partnership. I think there was maybe 2 particular properties that were prior Save Mount Diablo properties. There are other properties that were not. And then there's about 4,000 acres of properties that were purchased in partnership with the Habitat Conservancy and are thus subject to the HCP itself. So it's kind of an interesting mosaic. When we talk about kind of planning on the preserved land system with Clayton Ranch, we're really talking about the 4,000 acres that we purchased in partnership with the Conservancy. There's about another 1,000 acres that are not subject to the HCP.
Okay, so I kind of lost you there. I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, it's fine.
So is the Safe Mount Diablo property, and that's property that goes is accessed off of Marsh Creek Road, where the water tank is there at the summit there.
Yeah.
Is that part of it?
There is one. I think there may be one or two properties, and we can get a map and I can really talk you through it, that were purchased from Safe Mount Diablo. And because of the way the agreement was written back in 2007, it was a Safe Mount Diablo property, but subject to the HCP, and ended up counting towards the HCP's lands. I think it's Chaparral Springs.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the reason I asked that is because I recall when I was active with Save Mount Diablo back in those days, we went in there and built some trails. And this was whenever, probably early 2000s, I think, or maybe even before that. And, you know, I was, and nobody has ever used those trails since then. So they'd probably be pretty hard to find. And I'm wondering if you're aware of those trails and if we get to use them now, because Save Mount Diablo was smart enough to get in there, and that's their way. The way they do things is get in there and do it. Are those trails on? They were narrow trails.
Yeah. No, those maps.
Are those?
Yeah, they're mapped, and they are part of what we would consider in the phase one a part of the existing conditions. So they are being accounted for. Some of them are overgrown, and they'll require a little bit more examination on if we can really use all of those trails. But we are aware of them. They are mapped, and we are accounting for them in the planning process for sure.
And if I'm not mistaken, and if I might say this, I believe there were Park District people there when we were building those trails, and so they weren't done as a bunch of amateurs out there with Pulaski's and McLeods. They were done with professional guidance. So I mean, I feel good about that.
Oh,
there's not we're not inheriting yet more of those unsustainable facilities that have been provided before. Okay, good. This is just a comment. The phase 4, what is it? I'm trying to read my own writing here. Minimization measures. I feel like those are good. And a question, there was a statement in the slides that you've developed stronger relationships with partners, and I understand who those partners are. And what does that mean in real life? I mean, how did you do that, and what does it mean in terms of for what we're trying to do out there? Well,
ultimately, it meant a lot of meetings and a lot, some out in the field and some just, looking at printed out maps. To really, and then of course, Josh walked you through kind of what the pond analysis was, the aquatic habitat analysis was. I think what they wanted to see from the Park District planning side of things, including stewardship, was that we were really taking into account the guidelines. And I think in the past, they have seen evidence of other HCPs and other implementing partners really not taking into account and just trying to do things business as usual. So, whatever another standard practice was, that would just be implemented. And so I think they wanted to see that we had a thoughtful process to address each one of the conservation measures guidelines that pertain to recreation and would pertain to our particular management area or planning area. So I think just by developing that process, and we really developed that process with them, we said, this is how we think we should plan for it. And then they had feedback on, the process that we were proposing. So they were really instrumental in even developing the recreational planning process. And then they were able to be participants in how we actually planned on those lands following the process. So I think that just helped build a lot of trust, and that we weren't just going to, without regard of the conservation measures guidelines, just adopt a recreation planning process and assume that we could, open that up to the public. Because ultimately, we can't open up public access without U.S. Fish and Wildlife and CDFW giving permission on the recreation plan. So they didn't really want to see a plan that didn't take it into any consideration the conservation measures.
Yeah, no, you would, I can understand that. And I'm wondering if, does this affect future actions on their, for future analyses of what we're doing on other projects? In other words, since they trust us, is it going to help us in the future with what we're kind of proposing?
Josh, do you want to address that?
Hi, Director Mercurio. Part of my job at the Park District is I do most of the biological permitting, and our relationships with the regulatory agencies it's hugely important. So building trust with them and accountability is really key to being able to move projects forward with them. So yeah, strengthening the relationships through this process will help with future projects as well.
Yeah. Now, my wife is a civil engineer, and she has had to work with Caltrans, and she developed a relationship with one particular individual who had control and yes and no kind of stuff over what she was trying to do. And it was so much easier for her to do it than other people, other public works directors that she knew, because she had this great relationship. So, that sounds like what we're doing, and that's what I would have hoped for. So that's congratulations. Thank you so much. Boy, we need all the help we can get. Let's see. So you had a figure for public access, 3 to 5 years. And I'm hoping that's not true for Clayton Ranch, maybe a portion of it. Maybe it's sooner. I sort of heard something about that maybe part of it could be open in less than 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I try to be a little conservative when giving timelines. Clayton Ranch, we're fortunate in the sense that we don't really need to build a lot in order to open up at least a portion of it, especially on the HCP preserved lands. If we can, reach agreements with the city of Clayton and be able to utilize their some of their trails. Ultimately, though, we still have to adopt a preserve management plan for Clayton Ranch. And so that's sort of, once we can adopt Vasco Hills and Byron Vernal Pools, which the Conservancy is sort of, hoping to move forward this year, then we'll have a really good template that we can hopefully move the process much quicker for Clayton Ranch. So we're anticipating that the planning process for the preserve management plan will be much quicker with Clayton Ranch, and then it wouldn't require construction like the way at Roddy Ranch. There's going to be a lot of construction before we can open up public access there. So
with Clayton Ranch, it's pretty straightforward from a non-construction standpoint.
Exactly.
Okay, and finally, I guess a comment. When we're opening up these new properties and which have added responsibilities, being the habitat element of it, even more than, we try to protect the habitat no matter what property it is, but this is a different deal. I would hope that one key element is enforcement early and often when these are opened, to establish a presence there, because I think that's a key to how can I, in colloquially expressed, not develop bad habits, out there by users. So I would support something like that, and sounds like that's kind of what the thinking is on it. So anyway, those are my comments, and I appreciate the presentation and the promise that we have of getting some new parks out there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Coffey?
Naoma, you referenced recreation plans that have been approved, presumably by the Fish and Wildlife agencies, and you had specific acreage. Maybe I missed it, but I'm wondering what specific plans those were.
So we have the approved recreation plan for the Vasco Hills Byron Vernal Pools. It's chapter 7 of the Vasco Hills Byron Vernal Pools Preserve Management Plan. So the Preserve Management Plan is written by the Habitat Conservancy, and the park district basically provides all of the information that goes into chapter 7 of that plan. So the Conservancy is required to adopt these preserve management plans as part of their mitigation measures, as part of the implementation of the plan. So we have approval from the resource agencies on our proposed recreation plan. So then ultimately the Conservancy can approve it by their the full preserve management plan. So we don't need to go back to the resource agencies for the recreation component of that area. And then the same thing with Roddy Ranch Golf Course. While our planning staff went through the process for the restoration and public access plan, we conferred with the resource agencies on that recreation plan, and they gave permission for that to proceed as planned. And when we go to adopt full 100% designs and move forward with construction, we won't have to go back to the resource agencies for any additional approvals on the recreation element of the Roddy Ranch Golf Course. And then for Clayton Ranch, we went through kind of that preliminary concept of what we would like to see at the recreation on the Clayton Ranch preserve lands, and the same. That's a little bit more of a tentative approval because the preserve management plan hasn't been drafted yet for that area. So they haven't seen the full chapter 7, but in terms of like the general plan that we have for what the recreation network would look like at Clayton Ranch, they have given like tentative approval on Clayton Ranch.
When we're talking about Vasco and the approvals given there, I have been shown and had discussions with your colleagues, Brian and Ken's predecessor, over the last couple of years. These were, and I'm wondering whether we're talking about the same thing in terms of the recreation plans that have gone for the resource agencies. And those were trail plans that were interconnected between the Byron properties and Vasco Hills.
Yes.
And by the way, John, I asked them to go over those with you. At some point, it's now Ward 6. It was Ward 7.
Right, exactly.
On
Okay.
the Byron side, the Vasco side's always been Ward 6. Anyway, that all aside, I've been privy to those plans. So are those trails, which were, if my memory's right, were more than mostly existing ranch roads, with, I believe there was one newly created narrow trail on the Vasco side, if my memory is right. In any event, when we're referring to the recreation plan that's been approved, we're talking about those trails essentially?
The trails and the access points, so the trailheads, the smaller parking areas, as well as kind of a future location for a larger staging area. All of those elements have been approved. Yeah.
Okay, and so we've done similar with Roddy Ranch. That was an extensive process.
Yeah.
Including a lot of public input. And ultimately, I recall, because I think it was last year that the board approved that general land use plan, emphasizing that we want a shot at some of the design issues having to do with trails, trail width and things like that. So that is yet to come. But I don't remember that kind of process with the Vasco and Byron trails. Is that because it's a more simplistic approach to just use existing trails? So we haven't done those extensive public input sessions, and there's not going to be a lot of construction, and it has yet to go to the park district board is my thought at this point. Do I have that right?
Yeah, it's a little, we haven't fully worked out how full adoption will go. The park I'm happy to have a further conversation with you, kind of a little bit more in depth, because it gets a little complicated on prior agreements and future agreements, and
that's fair.
Yeah. But it does get a little complicated for sure, and the differences in the approach, a lot of it has to do with just how more complicated the Roddy Ranch Golf Course was.
Okay, so, but it is a significant difference, and I'm just listening to you and juxtaposing being involved in both those planning exercises, that there is a significant difference, including getting to the district board. Here's my concern and more of a comment. We're not going to engage at this point on it, but the tension that has existed, that's been, as you know, pretty vociferous and loud when it came to Director Lane and myself, has been over what we're characterizing as the balance between public access and recreation and habitat preservation. Because this puts you, Brian, it puts our planners in a very difficult position, and you should know that we always appreciated that and understood it. The difficulty being, and I'm thinking specifically of Vasco and Byron and my involvement over the last couple of years, and some public comment, and then a public statement, and the same at Roddy, especially with Bev and I, and that is, we think that balance is off, that there are such restrictions on public access, especially at staging areas, that balance is really skewed. So John, you know, Byron and Vasco will be have tremendous utilization potential from the Brentwood area. And the Brentwood area is teeming with kids and young families, just teeming, as is Oakley in East County. And when I looked at the access points, I said, oh, great, that looks good. How much parking is going to be there? Are we going to have a bunch of picnic tables? Are we going to have shade? Because that area, as you know, gets really hot. What are we going to do, especially at the staging areas? And slowly but surely, the realization was that I came across, and Bev, less involved, but at the same time, was that these type of public access amenities that make it easy for kids, you know, to have picnic tables, for instance, and shade and all that, they're not happening. And they're not happening because our staff, honestly and forthrightly, and as they should, tell us the resource agencies won't allow it. And I'm at the point where I look at Naoma and Brian and others and say, how about 1 or 2 picnic tables, pretty please, with, you know, cherry on top of it all, just something, and it's difficult. And so that exists. We're all aware of it. And we've been put in, I think with Roddy, Bev was pushing so hard, I had to come back and say, you know, I'm aware that our staff, our planners are forceful with the resource agencies, and, you know, tell them, look, our boards, our public, our constituencies, our stakeholders want shade. They want picnic tables. And in Roddy Ranch, they want some more trees. And, you know, there's that kind of pressure. And I acknowledge that. I know our folks do battle on a certain level. It's all respectful. As you said, you know, personal relationships are important, but we do expect our planners to have to go at it sometimes for the resource agencies, because we think that balance is off. It's to the point with me personally where I think a lot about certain acquisitions that are planned for with HCP, and it makes me wonder whether East Bay Parks and our residents and our constituents aren't better off not partnering with HCP for a particular parcel of land. If there's other sources of money, we do this for money. It's 15,000 acres approaching now. It's going to be another 15,000 acres in the future is the plan. And we're going to be running into that problem with those additional 15,000 acres. So this is just something we all have to deal with and understand. And I know of one parcel that might be HCP. And I'm actively thinking that, maybe we don't want that because it's going to be in a location where restricting, things like picnic tables is hard. Not being able to put up a wind barrier, I'm told, at Roddy, at the staging area. Maybe shade because it affects the avian predators' ability to go after critters. Those things are really severe. So I would leave with management just a final thought that Roddy Ranch, we dealt with and been able to take those trade-offs at the board level with a kind of like to be continued. I'm a little concerned that if the board in the final design analysis insists on more trees, which we may, it's an important issue, may compel us to go back to the resource agencies and be turned down. I don't know. That's your, but you did say that we don't have to go back. I'm really wondering about that if the board wants to insist on certain amenities that we consider more design. And Vasco Byron properties haven't come to us at all. And to get resource agency approvals, that may be somewhat tentative as well, is if folks like John and the rest of us really think we ought to be battling for a few more picnic tables. So that's a thought I'm going to leave with management. And lastly, to move on, Naoma, what are the mistakes you've learned that other agencies across the nation that use Habitat Conservancy funding have encountered that we're avoiding? What just quickly, what rattle off to you?
I think Josh actually had some really good conversations at the conference. So Josh, do you want to?
I'm curious.
Speak to some of these lessons learned. I can name some, but
yeah, Naoma and I can handle this one together. Director Coffey, we had a lot of interesting interactions at the HCP Coalition meeting. One point that was brought up repeatedly was that a lot of the HCPs that are having a harder time, they didn't have a willing partner like the East Bay Regional Park District to help them. So people did try to recruit Naoma after hearing her present, because they kind of lacked that partnership with the park district that has the resources that we have, that has we have a police department, we have a fire department, we have biologists. So those are all things that we bring to the table that a lot of other HCPs don't have. So I think not having that involvement from different technical experts led to some of the problems that were happening on other HCP lands. We had a lot of discussions about mountain bikes on HCP preserve lands. That is something that we're dealing with on all of our park lands. And I think it provides the opportunity to think about how we will be addressing that, on HCP preserve lands, whether or not it's looking for other opportunities in the region where mountain bikes are more appropriate. So maybe a more regional approach to that. And that's what comes to mind now. Naoma, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think your first point was really the important one. I think that a lot of other partner agencies didn't really internalize what they were agreeing to when they signed, implementing agreements or decided to partner with a different HCP. So they didn't really internalize that they might have to change their expectations and their practices. So I think, I know that there was one example in San Diego County where an HCP preserve land was adjacent to kind of an off-road vehicle park, and the park, the implementing kind of parkland agency wasn't willing to just, really set the expectation that they would have to manage that land differently, enforce it differently, and get their users to buy in to it. So they set no expectation for their recreational users or for their staff, or even at a policy level at the, management and kind of, implementing policy level. So it really led to just kind of people being like, oh, that land's open now. I'm recreating out here with my OHV. I'm just going to go cross the fence and go recreate there. And then it's basically just an expansion of the OHV park, and it's not meeting any of the biological goals and objectives. So I think there's like a willingness that the park district is showing to really understand that we have agreed to these guidelines and these restrictions. And it just means that recreation will be different. So we're going to, maybe have different branding or have an education campaign to really get our users not to expect picnic tables at Byron the same way that they might expect them at Contra Loma. That the expectations are different. Just like people are willing to go to Round Valley without their dogs, because dogs aren't allowed at that particular park. And, the vast majority of users at Round Valley don't have an issue, but we did a really good job of setting that expectation at that park for those users. And so I think it's just kind of that willingness to really, work with our recreational users and set expectations at both internally and externally that's what's been really different. And I felt like that kind of got repeated from Florida to San Diego to, Texas. There was just a much, a willingness with our district.
Yeah, I agree that people get used to the circumstances that we create in the environment, and it gets to John's suggestion that we develop that park and trail centric culture early in their openings. That doesn't necessarily mean they're happy about it. I run into people in East County all the time who say, I wish I could use Round Valley, but I can't take my dog there, and that's what I do. I hike with my dog, and so Round Valley's off my list. That is something that I hear all the time. So it's maybe understood, but it's not appreciated. That totally. I do explain why, and then people say, "Oh, okay, Kit Fox." they at least they understand it better. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you for all the feedback.
Thank you so much, both Neoma and Josh. Really interesting discussion, and really appreciate the questions from Director Coffey and Director Mercurio. And we're glad to have our staff, so please don't go anywhere else. We really value the work that you're doing, and obviously it's recognized by others as well. I do see that Mr. Abreu has his hand up. Oh wait, John, did you have something first?
Yes, I apologize. I left out one of my questions, and then I came up with another comment to make as a result of what Director Coffey was saying. But I guess my question is, there was at the beginning of the presentation, when it was talking about phase 2, there was a phrase, reduce new and ongoing maintenance costs. And I think that was referring to a reason not to build a bunch of new roads and trails and things. Is that correct? So that begs the question, what about building new trails to replace ones that might be too steep and hard to maintain? So they're saying in there, we don't want to spend a lot of money on maintenance, but what if what you're given is going to cost a lot in maintenance? And if you just do this little reroute over here and take it off the ridge line and contour, I don't want to get into details, but there, I don't know if any of those trails are steep and are going to be subject to erosion. Now, I know that with all these storms that we just had, we've got lots of proof, and you can go and look at the slope there and see it's worse and worse as the trails are steeper and steeper. Is there the ability to do spot reroutes and things before it opens to fix those things?
Yeah, Director Mercurio, we do have the opportunity to create new trails on HCP preserved lands and to reroute trails to minimize impacts on sensitive biological resources. It's pretty interesting the way that the HCP is set up. We're given an allotment of total acreage of impacts. So when we do build a new trail, it will take, it would dip out of that category of the acreage that we have available to us, but it's entirely possible. And when there's a good reason to do it, such as a trail is not sustainable, it's in too steep a terrain, that would be a prime example to move forward with.
So do you get credit if you decommission the bad section?
That wasn't Director Mercurio, that wasn't addressed explicitly in the plan. It is something that we have begun to bring up to the resource agencies, and they are willing to kind of do an exchange of sorts. Like if you restore a certain number of linear feet of something, and then maybe you get credit towards the 50 acres limit. They have told us basically it won't be a 1-to-1 ratio. Like they will still, it will still be considered new impacts, and so they wouldn't want it to just be 1-to-1, but it would be, we would get some sort of credit for it. So, but we just haven't finalized those details yet.
No, based on what I know about our district, I have total faith that there's a high likelihood that a quality, would be a quality restoration, and over time it wouldn't even be recognized as where a trail used to be. So that's where I'm coming from with that. And then I'm wondering, just a real quick one here, are we going to call them preserves instead of parks?
So we already have, that distinction baked in, with our parkland system. So, Tilden's a regional park, but Las Trampas, for example, is a regional preserve. We haven't just completely decided on the nomenclature that we want to use specifically for the HCP preserves system lands, but it would probably at the very least start with regional preserve. And maybe if we wanted to do some sort of designation within the name itself, that's still kind of up for discussion. But
yeah, it just seems like, if you're having to impose rules upon users that they find onerous, like Director Coffey was talking about the dog issue at Round Valley, all you have to do is just point to the sign and say, you see what it says there? It's a preserve.
It's a preserve,
That's kind of important. And, and some people that's enough, others it's not. But I just feel like if we're gonna, significantly limit usage in there, that might be a kind of a help to us to have that title on there. I'd be very happy with that if that was the case. But okay, that's all I had. Sorry for getting in there again, but I couldn't let it go.
Hey, no worries. Appreciate
All right, thank you.
the comments and really the points about expectations and transparency, and really informing people about why we're doing certain things are critical. All right, I do see that Mr. Abreu has his hand up. Our Madam Secretary, would you like to call on Mr. Abreu, and we'll see if there's anyone else who has public comments.
Yes, Mr. Abreu, you may go ahead. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, well, I'll just start with the name of this item, this agenda item: recreation planning and preserve lands. And in your minds, you're thinking of Vasco Caves Regional Preserve, Las Trampas Regional Preserve, Brushy Peak Regional Preserve, and there's something like 15,000 acres in this thing, and there's another more acres in Roddy Ranch and Vasco Hills. Now, I put forward, I would posit that this is an insular viewpoint, because in my mind, this preserve lands is Mission Peak Regional Preserve and Sunol Wilderness Regional Preserve. So when I came to this agenda item, I was thinking, okay, we're going to talk about all these preserves. Well, we're not. We're only talking about something that's related to the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan and Natural Community Conservation Plan, which was enacted when? 2007, which will possibly open its first gates a little bit when? 2027. That's 20 years. 20 years. And then, of course, people like me who never heard of this topic would say, why, why does it take 20 years? Or it's already been 15 years. What have we been doing? The planning process, we heard, carefully defines each stage of the HCP, and everything is done very, very carefully. I come from Silicon Valley, and we believe in paralysis by analysis. And we also believe in move fast and break things and social networks and stuff like that. So I would say that we need to start doing things. And this idea of picnic tables and shade for families with children sounds great to me. And I would say that that's the way to do it if you're trying not to have impacts on sensitive habitats, because if you put the people next to the parking lot at picnic tables underneath the shade, then they're not going to be out there trampling on the frogs. That's how I think about it. When you are talking about, oh yeah, isn't this wonderful? We're going to have enforcement. Well, this enforcement prosecutorial mindset is kind of ineffective. I can prove it with all the parking tickets at Mission Peak. I'd suggest strategically placed fencing if you want to keep people out of something. That usually works pretty good. Finally, these agencies that we've been looking at, the county land use authorities, the CDFW, that are supposed to be so environmental, the only place that they enforce their environmental rules is on the park district. They don't enforce or oversee conversion of privately owned wetlands to large ponds. They're not enforcing road building on private ranches. They're not enforcing landfilling. They're not enforcing a lot of stuff that's happening all over the place on satellite photos on private lands. So, they're over enforcing the park district, I think. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abreu. And I see that Mr. Hansen also has his hand up.
You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair Eccles and Board Member Mercurio and Coffey. Thank you. This has been a very interesting presentation. I know the issues come up, certainly with the Roddy Ranch project, and appreciate some of the things that are found out in this conference. I guess just wanted to maybe bookmark a few questions to follow up on. I'd be curious if the combined preserve plan that includes the recreation element, if the approaching the HCP would be a way just to read that for the public. And for us, I'm as conservation chair of the California Plant Society East Bay chapter. Okay, so basically look for, I think would be very interesting. I think we have a real interest, and Naomi, you mentioned that there were biological goals and objectives and a recreational plan. And we're really encouraged by the district's nature check, which is a beginning to start to identify the kind of indicators of species at risk, but hopefully taking that a bit further, just like a recreational plan, in citing areas of sensitivity in the parks and the preserves. And so I'd be really curious if the HCP's preserve plan, goes beyond just kind of looking at maybe a pond here and some scrub there, but actually looks at migration patterns and looks at the layers of what wildlife need in these areas, because as we know, they're pretty stressed and they need these areas as preserves. So we're really glad to see them. And I guess just a final, one quick point. I'd be really curious if we are starting to do that with our wilderness preserves and preserve lands in terms of identifying in essence, the ecological plan for sustaining those populations. And I guess lastly want to say I appreciate Board Member Coffey bringing up looking at Roddy in terms of the trail width. We had a really good discussion on that, trying to find some ways to accommodate multi-use in ways that are safe and desirable for all different users. And I will say that we're not giving up on the trees on the ridgeline. We did submit some information that suggests that because of soils and the historical patterns there, at least the blue oak on the ridgeline there is, let's just say it's not a done topic. And perhaps we can get a few in the parking lot too. Anyway, I'll just leave it there and thank you for holding the meeting today. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, Madam Secretary, do we have any other public comments on this item?
There were no other public comments received on this item.
Great. So it's time to move on to our next agenda item, which is the Sibley Stream restoration at the former McCoster property. And we're receiving an update by landscape architect Carmen Erasmus.
Yes, let me share my screen. Is that looking good?
Mhm.
Great. Good afternoon, Natural and Cultural Resource Committee members. My name is Carmen Erasmus, landscape architect with East Bay Regional Park District in the Design and Construction Department. It's my pleasure to present the construction progress of Alder and Leatherwood Creek within Robert Sibley Volcanic Preserve, which is called the McCosker Creek Restoration Project. I've presented a few times in the past about the challenges the team has faced due to natural occurrences during construction. Challenges like drought, fire shutdowns, bird nesting, and historic flooding has lengthened our anticipated construction timeline to a little more than 3 seasons. Today, I'll focus on the progress we have made as we are almost complete with the project. The good news is that we anticipate completing this spring with an early summer opening, so everyone can see the project in person. Today, I'll present photos of the construction progress sequencing from year 1 through year 3, and finally end with a 3-minute video of the atmospheric river that occurred at the end of last year. Also, an acknowledgement to some of our partners and funders of the Park District's largest creek restoration project and the largest creek daylighting project in the East Bay. First, to orient you to the project, it's located in the East Bay Hills, and its importance as it sits at the top of the larger San Leandro Creek watershed. The Park District has projects within this watershed from head to toe. Zooming into the park scale, the McCosker parcel is within Sibley Volcanic Park. The project is located within unincorporated Contra Costa County, approximately 1 mile northwest of the township of Canyon. Alder and Leatherwood Creeks are situated within a deep canyon of dense oak woodland at the bottom of a ridgeline of rolling grassland hills. The project area contains a few riparian zones with ephemeral creek corridors fed from several existing natural springs, and the bowl shape of this watershed also supplies water to the creek during the rainy season. Here's looking at Sibley Round Top on a different type of day. Along with restoring and fixing the creek and removing the culverts and the fill, the project provides habitat for many listed species, including rainbow trout. Just a little bit of history and background about the project site. The watershed here was unfortunately degraded and significantly modified as it was a location of a rock crushing operation and heavy equipment storage and use. The natural bowl shape of the site was filled in with material brought in from offsite to create flat spaces. And the water still required a place to exit, so all of the fill contained culverts within. Here's a photo showing one of those culverts when water is flowing. And then behind is a fiddleneck field, which is one of the largest flat spaces on the project. The parcel was donated to the district in 2010, and planning efforts began around 2013, permitting and design around 2016-17, and construction began in 2020 with completion in 2023. The map tells us that this project is enormous in scale and its timeline and funding and staff required to bring it to fruition. I'll take a moment to highlight that I'm one of many people that have worked to bring this project forward. Champions of this project include Julie Bondurant and Kim Tai in the planning department, Matt Grall in stewardship, and Ren Bates and Lisa Gorgian in design and construction. There's also a large consultant team and construction team in the field, and they are responsible for thousands of details that can only be determined by working in and with the ground. So let's start at the beginning. These are the photos of the condition of the site before construction. The creek flowed below ground, but is hidden in a series of culverts. The land was collapsing and subsiding and was unsafe for visitors and staff. Sections were eroding and depositing sediment into San Leandro Creek, and these holes quickly became larger and more unsafe over time. Most of the water passing through was also not available for any riparian plants or animals on the site, and cut off fish passage from San Leandro Creek. The project also addresses climate change by increasing the carbon sink, removing invasive species, and enhancing habitat and adding vegetation. As you can see by these large numbers, it's one of the largest restoration construction endeavors the Park District has undertaken. The project daylights 2,900 linear feet of culverts. By removing culverts, it restores 3,000 linear feet of aquatic habitat, excavated 37,000 cubic yards of fill, and consists of 250 acres of open space, and restores and enhances 4 acres of riparian area. Moving to a plan of the project work site, which includes gravel roads, nature trails, and future amenity areas. This plan highlights the creek restoration work shown with the 2 shades of green. We're restoring 2 separate creeks, Alder here shown at the bottom and Leatherwood up here. San Leandro Creek is directly across the road, connected by an underground culvert and with fish baffles to encourage the fish to come upstream. The original scope of the project was to phase the creek construction into year 1 and year 2, completing 1 section of Alder in 2020 and the remaining sections in 2021. Due to the result of the project delays, we required a 3rd season of construction into this year. This is the plan showing the public access and staging areas for the future campground site up here. This is a section cut drawing through the site showing the height extents from one side of the project to the other, to the bottom of the creek channel. And a couple more section cuts in different locations, and the one on the top is showing one of the culvert crossings. This is the section looking in the other direction, shows the reconstructed channel, which is a step pool system it incorporates cascades and resting pocket pools. And this is to encourage the fish to land here. And it helps have sediment deposit into the spaces, providing benefits for aquatic organisms and spawning sites. As I mentioned before, these were some of the challenges the project team faced navigating the construction process. In the next section, I'll show you photos of the progress and the current conditions. This set of photos are from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd construction seasons, 2020 through 2023, with some pre-construction photos shown thrown in for context. And here's a couple of photos of the construction team in action. So I'll walk you through the project essentially from right to left, so the bottom of the creek up to the top, starting at Pinehurst and walking up to the upper reaches of Alder. So these are photos from pre-construction at the entrance at the original staging area. And you can see how the site grading changed in the photos. And what you see here is that the site was level with the adjacent access road. All this vegetation is on top of imported fill material with culverts below. The top right photo shows the driveway and out to Pinehurst Road. And across the road is San Leandro Creek. And the top left photo is the pump house, which was removed in 2020. This is the same area in 2021. You can see the section of fill that was excavated Slopes were rebuilt, vegetative soil lifts, and planted with willow pole stakes. The channel was rocked and riffle pools created. And the crew installed the fish baffles inside this culvert so the trout could make their way from across the way. This is what it looks like today. The willows are thriving. The picture on the right shows the deciduous winter condition and the creek full of water. This is a little bit further up the section, the channel, showing habitat logs and full vegetation. And this was what the site looked like last week. And moving up the creek, this is the confluence of Leatherwood, which was previously a culvert hidden by vegetation. This is what it looked like at the end of 2020. We were halfway done, but buttoned up for with erosion control material for the winter. This is what it looked like in late 2021. This is during the 155-year storm flow. The creek is extremely full and flowing rapidly. And this is what it looked like in spring of this year, or sorry, of 2022, last year. And Leatherwood last week. This is looking at the top of Leatherwood Creek in 2021, showing one of the many root wads that we placed in the channel. And we took these from trees that were growing in the middle of the channel section. Some of the wildlife seen on site, the sharp-tailed snake, coyote pups, actually several coyote pups in different seasons, ladybugs, and of note, we observed a young of year rainbow trout in the channel in late winter 2021. That's this guy here. Going up to the first culvert crossing, which we call Bridge 1. This is what the area looked like pre-construction in 2021, summer 2022, and last week. And a closer view of the clear water flowing. Moving further up, this is early in the grading operations in summer 2020. This is 2021. And spring 2022 with the nature trail being cut in. And this is what it looks like recently. And going up towards the fork of Alder and where the west and east branch come together. This is the top right photo, shows pre-construction. You can see the fill line at the orange fence. It's about the same height as the bottom of the fence. And at the bottom photo, you can see that the same orange fencing excavated out. You can see how deep the fill amount was. It's about 20 to 30 feet down. Here's looking up from the other side during operations in 2021. Note the scale of the crew and equipment in relation to the soil lines. This is what it looked like in spring 2022 with planning and erosion control still remaining to be done. And finally, the last section of the creek, the upper east branch and third crossing. This is an example of one of the sinkholes in the area. This is excavation and bottom of earthwork grade. And here's a ladder in here for scale. And this is what it looked like in the fall of 2022, where rock seeding and erosion control was in place. We just had planting to come. And this is what it looked like late last year. And this is a couple photos of the public amenities that were completed. One of the new nature trails that follows the creek channel alignment. And a new seeding overlook using reclaimed logs from the felled site trees will become a good spot for interpretation and reflection. So I have one video that I would like to share. One second. Oh, let me start it from the beginning. Sorry. Can you see that? Okay.
Is there audio, Carmen?
Yeah, it's very subtle. It's just the sound of the water. That's it. So I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have. And I look forward to seeing you all out there at the board tour.
Great, Carmen, thank you so much. That's really a fabulous presentation, and I really enjoy seeing the progress over time, and also the storm and the post-storm calm. The post-storm calm is quite beautiful. So thank you. I'm glad that's how it looks now. Anyway, so Directors Mercurio or Director Coffey, do you have questions, comments?
No, it was just really cool to see it in being tested.
Mhm.
That was a fortuitous test, and it appeared like it passed with flying colors, all these new creeks there.
That's right.
Congratulations.
Yeah, they were doing beautifully. I noticed it particularly at the confluence. They really, it's well done.
We had our first experiment last year in October, where we had the 155-year storm, and amazingly the creek held. So this storm was over a longer duration, but it seemed to be actually less water at the most intense part. So it was interesting to see.
Yeah, well, tested twice in 2 different ways.
Mhm.
Wonderful, great job. Director Mercurio, did you have questions or comments?
Yeah, I recall in the early days of this project, hearing about it on the Parks Advisory Committee, and it's nice to be continuing to see the progress to completion, and to see how very natural it looks. I mean, it's you could totally fool somebody if you were so inclined to say, look at this ancient stream that's been here forever, and it's really, really good. So it shows that you can engineer nature if you have the resources and the knowledge. And then I was looking at the facts and figures, and I kind of had to figure out a way to absorb how much creek was daylighted. And it turns out, if you want to look at it a different way, it's over half a mile of creek. And when you think of it that way, to me, that's even more meaningful than 2,900 feet. So congratulations. I know that's kind of a coming thing in years ahead, that we'll be seeing more of those around, not just in the Park District, but other places too. That's a a very good technique for improving habitat. But yeah, I look forward to going out there and seeing it on the ground when that is scheduled. So thanks to all for your efforts and your work.
Thank you.
I do have one question. So historically, way back before, you know, if the natural environment was messed up there in the East Bay Hills, do we know, was it were parts of that underground, or was it an above ground creek historically, if we go way back? And sorry to spring that on you. I just occurred to me as I was watching that. I know at one point there were some of both up here in the East Bay Hills, so just was curious.
Yeah, I see Matt popping in. I actually don't know historically beyond when the quarry operations were involved.
Yeah, at this site, there were open creek channels. I mean, and it was pretty obvious just from looking at the upstream area and the downstream, just the form of the stream and how it had been disconnected. And when I first went on the property years ago, didn't notice it at first because you come in, it's all flat and it's these grassy areas. And our old fisheries program manager, we got partway up near where the house is, and he said, "Well, where's the creek?" And I said, "What do you mean, Pete?" And he said, "Well, look, we're in this valley and there's the stream here." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're right." And then we started just like going like the rest of the trip. And then the next few times, it's like, we realized what a great opportunity it was to reestablish that creek, because the valley floor had been cut off and covered. So it was just a really easy way to reestablish those channels. Because I mean, while there had been a lot of fill and alteration of the land, it was somewhat minor compared to, I mean, they could have built larger structures on it. They could have done other things in those areas. So even though it was a lot of fill and it was a major project to remove it, it wasn't as much as some other urban areas where you have full on, you know, paved parking lots and structures on top of it. We had some small things, but nothing compared to what happens in other urban environments. So yeah, it was a natural channel though. And it's just, you can look, if we look at old historic photos or just the topographic map, you can really see where those channels used to be before the grading and started with this, ranch operation there.
Wow, but that's a wonderful story. Thank you, Matt, for sharing that. It's great to see that all open water now. Very, very nice.
Yeah, and I will just say it's just amazing to see it happen like relatively this quickly. I mean, just when we identified it about 10 or more years ago, it was just this dream, and we were just like, "Oh wow, this is gonna be the best creek restoration opportunity we're gonna ever see." I mean, just so straightforward, but it's gonna be really expensive and it's gonna take a long time. And that we're here now, it's pretty impressive just how quickly the grants came together, how quickly everything happened as the scale of certain projects. This one just got was a little bit easier because of, well, really other people's money. I mean, and we had a lot of grants, and there was actually the thing that really kicked us off and gave us the confidence to start was Caltrans had a violation, and the water board came to us and said, they've been trying to fix this violation for years. They don't have a creek restoration project. Do you have a project we can work on? And we said, well, yeah, we have one that we can get started. We really need money. And that's what really kind of helped create the vision and show what this would be. And then other grants just came in quicker than we expected. So it's and then it's taken a little longer to build it than we wanted, but it's just so big. That's not really that unexpected with the fires and the big storms. I mean, the mine delays have somewhat been really almost minor in the sense that it did take a whole other year, but it could have been much worse than it was just with all the climatic challenges over the last couple of years. So
yes,
really
absolutely. And thank you for mentioning that, Matt, because really when you think about both in terms of how quickly the money was able to come together, but then really the challenges in getting this done. And we've heard from Carmen and others before about just, with the fires and the floods and everything that's happened, that it's really actually incredible that it looks the way it does today. So thanks, my thanks to everybody. And I see Director McHugh. I just promoted you to doctor.
Yes. I presume that the district is interested in getting awards. I think that's a pretty safe assumption to make. So at some point, I would like to talk with one of you about nominating this project for an APWA award, because I have a little bit of knowledge of that program, and this really fits in well. So this is national scale here. It could win a national award. So we should talk about that. And unless you're already dialed into that, but it's totally like right in there, yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good suggestion. I'm sure. I know Mona Co often coordinates a lot of those award applications and fairs.
Right.
But for different groups, yeah, it's good to know about. And I don't know.
Yeah.
Carmen may know about the AWPA. I mean, I'm aware of them as an organization, but I've never applied for specific awards.
Well, I'm a life member of that organization and active in the chapter, and I can tell you that the district still has stuff out there in the future that I know they're big enough and they're hard enough and interesting enough where they would score well, you know. So we should really get dialed into that. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, well, thank you again. Thank you very much. And unless there's any other comments, I'm going to turn to Mr. Abreu. Go ahead, Madam Secretary.
You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. So when I see all this dirt being excavated out and looks like a little mini mountain of dirt or tunnel or valley of dirt removed, of course, first thing I ask is, where'd all that dirt go? Usually when you excavate things and you want to dump dirt somewhere and you want to do it legally, it turns into a big problem and has all this paperwork, and it's really a big problem. If you do it kind of illegally, then you can it's no problem at all. But then also on this thing, since it's a beautiful project, it's really lovely, and you know, I've got that you know, I've got a Berkeley mentality, and that's where my mindset is set, and I see all this stuff and I go, oh yeah, this is how things should be, how they ought to be done. But if let's say I transport myself to the East Contra Costa Habitat Conservancy area over there, and I try to do this thing over there. First of all, it's not wet enough and they're not going to grow enough trees. But if they did all this stuff, then I'd be going, oh, but wait a minute, you put this walking trail within 300 feet or 500 feet of the precious waterway. That's not allowed. And then what about all those giant logs you're using for benches that look like they look like logs, but they're actually benches for people to sit on? We don't want anybody sitting around. We don't want any you know, amenities. So this whole thing, which I think it's lovely, but over in East Contra Costa County habitat area, it would be all kind of illegal. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abreu, for your comments. All right, Ren, did you want to say something, or I just saw you.
No, I just would like to speak to the excavation and the cut fill. We balanced on site, so there was no off haul. The site was already massively disturbed, as we've seen, and so we took the fill that was placed in the channel and moved it up to a site that was already level by excuse me, the service area, and we made a large flat area. We raised that elevation up, and that'll be a future public campground for reservations. So we didn't off haul anything, and so we just balanced cut fill on site. I just wanted to make that note.
Oh, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay, so moving. Oh, so was there any other public comment on this item, Madam Secretary?
There were no other public comments on this item.
Great. And how about any public comments on items not on the agenda?
There were no public comments on items not on the agenda.
Okay, great. Well, we're getting to the end of our agenda then. So do any of our committee members want to make some comments?
Thank you for all the effort put into the presentations. They were very good today. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I would agree as well. Thank you.
Well, great. So anything further? I did want to just acknowledge our new head of ASD, Dr. Ken Wysocki, and welcome. This is your first meeting. I know you actually just started, I believe, the beginning of last week. So it's been a quick introduction, but we're very excited to have you here with us, and really look forward to working with you closely.
Yeah, same here. I'm very inspired by the board and the community input, and I'm really looking forward to a long future here. So thanks very much.
Great. And I did want to just note one other thing. Director Mercuro had mentioned to me that he felt it was very important to have a cultural resource issue on the agenda. And Ken and I did talk about that briefly. And I agree. I think it's important to have a sort of a standing item to focus as a goal of having a cultural resource issue on our agenda. But that's not to say that if there really isn't one that's ripe for discussion, I certainly don't want to create one, but I think it's be helpful as a goal to really focus on that part of our committee as well. And I suspect there probably will be enough items that we will have at nearly every meeting. Director Coffey?
Yeah, Elizabeth, my memory is that we had a committee discussion a couple of meetings ago or recently that came up with enough items for several years. If my memory's correct, maybe I'm wrong, Matt would remember. And I think both you and John are new to the committee this year and would, I think, yeah, it was Beverly and was it Dennis? In any event, either from the discussion of that or if there's a list somewhere that Matt's aware of, just make sure both of you are aware of that list as it may exist.
Yeah, Director Coffey, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, Sabrina and I have that list, Sabrina Pinnell, and we did look at it leading up to this meeting. And and Director Coffey's correct. There are plenty of topics to keep it busy for a couple of years if we did them all. And so we will be certainly considering that. There are a lot of natural resource topics, but there's also a lot of cultural suggested topics on that list. I also know that Brenda Montano from the archives group, and then also Anne Marie and Brian have some ideas. It's just there wasn't anything ready or right for this meeting. I think it was a bit of short notice once we got into January, got the committee announced. And so I know there'll be a cultural topic at the next meeting, and I think we have plenty more to work on, but we can clean that list up a little bit. Some of it was rough notes, but Sabrina and I were just looking at it yesterday as we were starting to work on the plan for the rest of the year. And we can clean that up and make sure Director Mercurio and Eccles have that list. So you all three have the list that we came up with at the last year, the end of last year. So we did the last meeting in November of last year. We had a running list that Colin's been adding to for years, but then we kind of went back over it and then made a good comprehensive list. So we just need to clean up a little bit and get it back to everyone.
Every one of them brilliant, I might add. So clean up as you would, but.
I have no doubt that there's a substantial list for this committee. I'm not worried about that in the slightest. So, and I'm not at all surprised that between Director Coffey and Director Lane and whoever else was on the committee last year, they had quite a list for you. So,
and since I'm the new guy, I'm not going to assume that I can add anything to that list. So I will stand down here. But watch me next year. Okay.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we're always open to suggestion though. So I mean, it's good if you have ideas or things you'd like to hear about. Sometimes it's good to know about it because then we can start gathering information, or it may take some time to put it all together. So don't hesitate to suggest ideas. We'll just let you know how much time they'll take or how practical it would be for a timely presentation.
Yeah, nothing urgent at this time. So it's good.
all right. So if there's nothing further, I think we can adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate all the hard work on the part of staff. And thank you, Director Mercuro, for joining us from Washington, D.C. and one advantage in Zoom. And have a good rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.